China's military threat to Taiwan usually gets framed as a single dramatic moment: missiles in the air, ships crossing the strait, an invasion that begins on a specific day and time. That's the picture most people carry in their heads, but that's not where the real pressure is happening right now. Taiwan is already under sustained coercion. The campaign is happening in the open, every day, in ways that fall just short of what we've traditionally called war. It's slow enough that it doesn't set off alarms for most of the world, but steady enough that it's gradually shifting the balance of power in the region. This is the gray zone, the space between peace and open conflict, where China is quietly trying to change the strategic reality around Taiwan without triggering a direct military response. You know the deal. I have a cup of coffee. I'm doing this in one take. If you haven't seen the intro, this is part 2. I'm going to put a little link above. I would strongly suggest go back, watch that one, and then come right back to this. We're going to take a little bit of a deeper look here into the gray zone. The gray zone isn't randomness, but it's not chaos either. It's definitely not a collection of unrelated incidents. It's a deliberate strategy built around the idea that you can fundamentally change the situation over time through small, sustained actions that never quite cross the line that would justify a forceful response. Instead of one big crisis, you create a constant series of low-level problems that force your opponent to react, spend their resources, absorb political pressure. In this environment, China operates just below the thresholds written into international law. It works around alliance commitments, basic military doctrine. The objective is to create incremental but irreversible change while making each individual move look too minor to really escalate over. A single air patrol, single Coast Guard patrol, import ban. None of these things by themselves look like a cause for war. Taken together over the years, they start to reshape the operating environment around Taiwan. The first place we've seen this very clearly is in the air. Every week, and often on a near daily basis, it seems. I mean, do a Google search. Search Google News. You'll find this. A Chinese aircraft carrier or aircraft enter Taiwan's air defense ID zone. And it's important to understand exactly what that means. The air defense identification zone isn't sovereign airspace. It's a buffer region. Aircraft are expected to identify themselves, but China uses this space to send fighters, bombers, anti-submarine aircraft, recon patrols, different platforms on routes that probe the edges of Taiwan's defenses. From a distance, these sorties can look routine. You see a headline with a number, 8 aircraft, 16 aircraft, sometimes more. But the real impact isn't captured by that raw count. It's the tempo. It's the pattern that matter. Every single one of these incursions forces Taiwan into a decision. Do you scramble fighters? Do you reposition ground-based air defense? Do you light up certain radars? Do you keep them silent? Even if Taiwan chooses restraint on a given day, China still learns something about reaction time, radar coverage, and command procedures. Over months, over years, that builds a detailed picture of how Taiwan operates under stress. At the same time, this is a war of attrition against readiness. Fighters aren't cheap to operate. Every scramble burns fuel, burns engine life. Airframes get fatigued. Maintenance crews work longer hours to keep older aircraft flight-worthy. And Taiwan's inventory is limited. It can't spread the wear and tear across hundreds of platforms the same way that China can. So each time Taiwan responds, it pays a cost that Beijing has already factored into this strategy. And there's a psychological element. The more often these flights occur, the more they start to feel like background noise. Activity that would have been considered alarming 10 years ago, it's now just another day. That normalization is dangerous because it makes it harder to distinguish between a familiar pattern of harassment and the early stages of a real crisis. When abnormal behavior is built on top of what already looks abnormal, early warning becomes much more complicated, and the same logic applies at sea, where China's approach is even more layered. Beijing doesn't simply send gray painted warships up to Taiwan's doorstep and leave it at that. No, they use their mixture. Coast Guard vessels, civilian ships, quote unquote, other naval assets positioned just out of immediate contact, but each category plays a specific role. The Coast Guard cutters, you've seen them, the white hulls, the law enforcement markings, they're often described by Beijing as conducting routine patrols, maritime law enforcement, whatever. In practice, they're asserting Chinese authority in waters that Taiwan and others don't recognize as Chinese at all. The language surrounding these operations is deliberately bureaucratic. Anonymous, generic phrases, right? Rights protection, normal management, whatever. The effect is to make Chinese presence in contested waters seem like an established and routine fact. Then there are the maritime militia fleets, large numbers of fishing vessels that can quickly concentrate in sensitive areas, shadow other ships, obstruct operations. These vessels give China a convenient layer of ambiguity. If they're challenged, they describe them as civilians just going about their business. If they're not challenged, they create a de facto presence that complicates everyone else's operations and gradually crowds Taiwan out of its own surrounding waters. Behind all this, over the horizon, on the edge of the operating area, there are the warships from the People's Liberation Army Navy, the Plan. They might not be directly involved in incidents with Coast Guard or militia vessels, but they're always part of the picture. Everyone knows they're there. And that knowledge shapes how far Taiwan or its partners are willing to push a confrontation with what China insists are civilian or administrative actions. Taken together, that maritime pattern creates kind of a creeping encirclement. Taiwan finds itself repeatedly forced into bad choices, unattractive choices. Push back too hard against a vessel that China labels as law enforcement or civilian, you risk being blamed for escalation. Don't push back, and you gradually allow new patterns of Chinese presence to become normal and normalized in waters that are vital to Taiwan's economy and, of course, their security. The gray zone doesn't stop, though. Not with ships, not with aircraft. It goes into economic, cyber, information domains as well. And we covered that on the first video, kind of a broad overlook, but economically, Beijing has shown a willingness to impose targeted import bans on Taiwan's goods. Pineapples, mangoes, fish, they're all blocked suddenly here and there on grounds for health, for safety. Even when there's little evidence of a genuine problem. These bans often appear at politically sensitive moments, put pressure on specific industries, maybe specific regions inside Taiwan. The message is clear. Beijing can increase or decrease economic pain at will, and can do so in a way that hurts particular communities more than others. And that kind of leverage can amplify domestic political tensions, particularly in a democracy where local livelihoods translate to political pressure. And watch, this is often around elections, both Taiwanese, regional partners, even American, potentially Europe. Cyberspace is a real problem. Taiwan's on the front lines of near constant probing and attack. Government systems, infrastructure, media outlets experience waves of intrusion. Their attempts, their denial of service campaigns, again, especially during elections or high-profile events. Most of these don't produce dramatic and long-lasting damage. That's not the primary goal here. The aim is create friction, force Taiwan to spend resources on defense, on recovery, to introduce a steady undercurrent of uncertainty about the resilience, the safety of key systems. On top of that, there's the information space itself. We talked about this last week. Beijing invests heavily in pushing narratives that serve its interests. That unification is inevitable. That Taiwan is isolated. That democracy is dysfunctional. That the United States is unreliable. These narratives don't have to persuade everyone. They only have to muddy the waters, deepen existing divisions, make it harder for Taiwanese society to form a clear, confident picture of its own situation. Put all of these things together, the picture becomes clearer. The gray zone campaign is not about winning a conventional clash. It's about shaping the environment so that if that crisis does occur, China enters it from a huge position of advantage, or ideally from Beijing's perspective, making sure that sort of crisis never has to occur at all because Taiwan's options are already constrained. If the Air Force is worn down by years of constant scrambling, if its Navy is crowded and pressured in its own surrounding waters, if its economy is repeatedly jolted by bans, if government systems are strained, if there is cyber pressure, if public debate is distorted by these external narratives, then any future decision about how to respond to Chinese actions will be made under much less favorable conditions. The real danger of this strategy isn't sudden shock. It's gradual paralysis. A state where Taiwan and its partners see the problem clearly, but find that many of the tools that they normally rely on have already been blunted. This has implications far beyond Taiwan itself. Other countries in the region, including Japan, the Philippines, eventually potentially Australia, are facing versions of that same gray zone tactics around their own territories and their maritime claims. They're all watching to see how effectively Taiwan can manage this pressure, how consistently the United States and other partners are willing to support it. So for Washington and its allies, the core challenge is that most of these gray zone actions fall below thresholds that traditionally trigger formal responses. There's no declaration of war. There's no single event that demands treaty-based reaction. Instead, it's a long series of moves. They all seem small, but collectively, they shift the baseline of what's considered normal in the region. That's what makes this situation so concerning. There may never be an obvious dramatic moment that forces a binary choice, A or B, one or two. Instead, the strategic ground moves a few centimeters at a time. If you only react to conventional triggers, you risk waking up one day to find that the underlying conditions have already changed in ways that are extraordinarily difficult to reverse. So stability around Taiwan isn't eroding because a war has started. It's eroding because the conditions of peace are quietly being rewritten through sustained, calculated pressure that avoids those red lines, still achieves the same effect. In the first episode, we looked at the broad outlines of Chinese strategy toward Taiwan, the long-term objectives. I called it the long con. Political framing, the way Beijing positions the issue in its overall national strategy. Here, we've gone down another level. We've looked how that strategy is implemented day to day. And again, it's not through dramatic, headline-grabbing moves, but through constant, grinding activity in the gray zone. In the next episode, we'll turn to the other side of the equation. We'll look at how Taiwan and its partners are responding, where those responses are working, and where the vulnerabilities still lie in the face of a strategy that's designed to stay just below traditional thresholds of deterrence. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.